It's the moment that we've been waiting for. Which bird will President Trump pardon for Thanksgiving? And the results are in.
Today's lucky bird and guest of honor is named Peas, along with his alternate named Carrots. This was a fair election. Unfortunately, Carrots refused to concede and demanded a recount, and we're still fighting with Carrots. And I will tell you, we've come to a conclusion. Carrots, I'm sorry to tell you, the result did not change.
Well, that's all the time we've got for tonight. But before I go, make sure to check out my brand new book, Rare Medium Are Done Well, Making the Most of Your Life. Now, it's not a cookbook, not a political book, but it's the kind of read that has the endorsements of people from as far to the left as Van Jones and to the right, such as Robert Jefferson, Eric Metaxas. It's an inspiration read just in time for Christmas, available online and in bookstores everywhere. And I hope you'll catch my weekend show, Huckabee, on TBN Saturday, Sunday, 8 and 11 Eastern. Right now, good night from Orlando. Shannon Bream and the Frocks.
Hey, listen, since that's not a cooking book, I'm going to give it a try. Thanks, Governor. All right, hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. Breaking news tonight on multiple fronts. President Trump says he's putting America first by not breaking ties with Saudi Arabia over the gruesome murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. General Jack Keane is here live with analysis. And several legal stories breaking tonight. Our top-notch attorneys are going to debate first President Trump's vowing action against the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals after a lower court judge there strikes down yet another Trump immigration decision. He calls the court a disgrace and a rubber stamp for his political enemies. Also tonight, a major milestone in the ongoing Russia investigation. The president's legal team turning in written answers to special counsel Robert Mueller. Plus, a New York Times report claims President Trump wanted to order the Justice Department to prosecute Hillary Clinton and former FBI Director James Comey. What former White House counsel Don McGahn is saying tonight about what the president did or did not ask him to do. Team coverage tonight. Kristen Fisher following new developments on the Saudi saga. But let's start with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge with the Mueller probe. Catherine.
Shannon, tonight the president's legal team issued a brief statement confirming the president's written responses are now with special counsel Robert Mueller. Significantly, the questions dealt with Russia-related topics, not the firing of FBI Director James Comey as part of any obstruction investigation. It has been our position from the outset that much of what has been asked raised serious constitutional issues and was beyond the scope of a legitimate inquiry, Rudy Giuliani said. This remains our position today. The president has nonetheless provided unprecedented cooperation. The president's team emphasized they've already provided 30 witnesses, 1.4 million pages with Russia-related topics, not the firing of FBI Director James Comey as part of any obstruction investigation. It has been our position from the outset that much of what has been asked raised serious constitutional issues and was beyond the scope of a legitimate inquiry, Rudy Giuliani said. This remains our position today. The president has nonetheless provided unprecedented cooperation. The president's team emphasized they've already provided 30 witnesses, 1.4 million pages of with Russia-related topics, not the firing of FBI Director James Comey as part of any obstruction investigation. It has been our position from the outset that much of what has been asked raised serious constitutional issues and was beyond the scope of a legitimate inquiry, Rudy Giuliani said. This remains our position today. The president has nonetheless provided unprecedented cooperation. The president's team emphasized they've already provided 30 witnesses, 1.4 million pages of material with Russia-related topics, not the firing of FBI Director with Russia-related topics, not the firing of FBI Director James Comey as part of any obstruction investigation. It has been our position from the outset that much of what has been asked raised serious constitutional issues and was beyond the scope of a legitimate inquiry, Rudy Giuliani said. This remains our position today. The president has nonetheless provided unprecedented cooperation.
And who was White House counsel at the time, his attorney speaking out tonight about this conversation that the president was pressuring McGahn to do something. They say Mr. McGahn will not comment on his legal advice to the president. That's from William A. Burke, his attorney. He says Mr. McGahn would point out, though, that the president never, to his knowledge, ordered that anyone prosecute Hillary Clinton or James Comey. But Andy, should we be surprised? This is something he talked about a lot during the campaign, that he at least wanted something to happen.
Right. No, he talked about it openly. I think Don McGahn is quite right that he should not get into a public discussion of his deliberations and discussions with the president. I also think, and I'll say what I've said from the beginning, Shannon, I don't think the president does himself good by weighing in on investigative matters, about talking about investigations that are ongoing, investigations he would like to see happen. I can tell you, having been a prosecutor for 20 years, it doesn't make the prosecutor's job any easier, because if you really have good evidence that would support a case, the public nevertheless thinks that the case is being brought because of political pressure rather than evidence.
Yeah, and Tom, we're told that essentially there was a memo prepared by White House lawyers for the president saying these are all the problems, the potential minefields if you go down this road. You can't tell the DOJ to prosecute anyone, but even launching the investigation is probably going to cause you more trouble than it's worth.
I agree with that, and I think Andy made a very good point in that the problem here is that once you cross that line and you have the president directing prosecutions or directing investigations, regardless of whether there's sufficient evidence for a conviction, those actions by the president would wind up just tainting the entire process for many people in America, that they would say, look, regardless of whether there's evidence here, this investigation or this prosecution has a political taint. So although we don't have the full story at this hour, it does sound like the president was getting some pretty good legal advice from his in-house team. Okay, he's going to be getting some legal advice, too, on this latest ruling that basically puts a hold on this asylum policy. In part, the idea was that the president was saying if you come across the border illegally, you're not going to get to claim asylum. You have to go to a port of entry. Well, the federal district judge who put a nationwide injunction on that essentially said this. He says the rule barring asylum for immigrants who enter the country outside a port of entry irreconcilably conflicts with the INA and the expressed intent of Congress. Whatever the scope of the president's authority, he may not rewrite the immigration laws to impose a condition that Congress has expressly forbidden. Andy, there's some people who say they feel that way about President Obama and DACA.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, look, Shannon, this is the same issue that came up with the so-called travel ban. And it simply is not true that the two provisions are irreconcilable. It's not true that this is a rewrite. The underlying law about the fact that illegal aliens are allowed under our law to apply for asylum wherever they are remains in place. The president, in dealing with an emergency situation under a sweeping statute of Congress's that the Supreme Court affirmed his use of and reliance on just 5 months ago, the president has a 90-day set of restrictions in place. At the end of 90 days, they lapse, and we go back to the status quo. The two provisions are easy to reconcile with each other, and it's clearly not a rewrite of the law.
Well, the president obviously very frustrated. This is what he had to say about that whole Ninth Circuit out there on the West Coast today.
It's not fair. People should not be allowed to immediately run to this very friendly circuit and file their case. In my opinion, it's a disgrace what happens with the Ninth Circuit. We will win that case in the Supreme Court of the United States.
And Tom, even if they do, people who are smart and go file these cases in the Ninth Circuit where they know it's not very friendly to the president's policies, it takes time and effort for the administration to have to deal with it in the meantime.
It does. And look, I mean, I think the president is right that, look, the fact is that he's going to have a hard road litigating this in the Ninth Circuit. And this may well go up to the Supreme Court. The thing I think to keep in mind, though, is that the Supreme Court doesn't have to take every case. They took the travel ban case. They got in. They stopped the Ninth Circuit there. But I think for the president's legal strategy, ultimately aimed at the Supreme Court, he's got to hope that the justices are going to be willing to step in to this politically fraught area of immigration again.
All right, Tom and Andy, thank you both very much. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving if we don't see you again.
Thank you, Shannon.
You too.
All right, two defining features of the evolving Trump doctrine on foreign affairs: maximum pressure on some of America's foes and put America first. But some of this president's staunchest conservative defenders worry too little heed is paid to a third key feature: America's moral voice on the international stage. Correspondent Kristen Fisher has more. Hello, Kristen.
Hey, Shannon. Well, for weeks, the world has been wondering, will President Trump punish the Saudi government for murdering journalist Jamal Khashoggi? And now we know there will be no further repercussions coming from the White House because President Trump believes a good U.S.-Saudi relationship is simply more important.
It's about America first. we're going to stay with Saudi Arabia.
For President Trump, it's about putting U.S. security and economic interests first, especially that $110 billion arms deal with the Saudis.
They're buying hundreds of billions of dollars worth of things from this country. If I say we don't want to take your business, if I say we're going to cut it off, they will get the equipment, military equipment and other things from Russia and China. Russia and China would be very, very happy.
The decision comes despite a report that the CIA has determined the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, ordered the murder. But today, President Trump again refused the assessment of his own intelligence community.
The CIA has looked at it. They've studied it a lot. They have nothing definitive. And the fact is, maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
The president's decision is being denounced by members of both parties on Capitol Hill, even by some of his closest allies. Quote, "One thing I learned during the Obama years is that when you look the other way regarding problems in the Middle East, it seldom works out." And Senator Rand Paul said, "I'm pretty sure this statement is Saudi Arabia first, not America first."
And in that statement, President Trump said that Congress was free to go in a different direction. And indeed, tonight, Senator Lindsey Graham said that he believes there will be strong bipartisan support for serious sanctions against Saudi Arabia. But Shannon, the message from the White House tonight is clear. It's putting business opportunities and security alliances over this egregious human rights abuse. Shannon.
All right, Kristen Fisher, thank you very much. With so much outcry from the left and the right to the president's remarks on Saudi Arabia today, will the administration be forced to take a tougher stance? Retired four-star general and Fox News senior strategic analyst General Jack Keane joins us now. Great to see you as always tonight, General.
Good to be here, Shannon.
So what about trying to thread this needle? Because there are some who will say, his critics, the president is overhyping the business relationships, the dollars at stake. He talked today, though, about the joint goal of fighting terrorism and how Saudi Arabia is a partner there. But many people just left and right outraged by this murder and the fact that they think the president needs to have a stronger moral position for our country.
Yeah, I think there really is a strategy forward where it's not exclusive of one another. In other words, this outrageous crime has always been at the intersection of America's national interest with a key ally and America's values. So can we develop a path forward where we deal with both of them? I think we can. First of all, we should see it as an opportunity to better the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia because of the severe international embarrassment that they're suffering as a result of this crime. And therefore, we can emphasize America's values. I think part of the strategy should be to say to the Saudis, the relationship is damaged, but it is repairable if you're willing to accept some conditions that will govern your behavior in the future. And we'd have to be specific about them: accountability, full disclosure, reestablishing trust, a toleration policy for critics and descendants. That would enable us, I believe, to push forward the moral clarity that this country has always had, and at the same time maintain the relationship. However, we would have to condemn the Saudi regime publicly. We're condemning a crime, but we haven't condemned the regime because it's difficult to accept the implausible theory that MBS was not involved or the Crown Prince. But let's just accept that for a minute, that he's not. The second in command of the intelligence service executed an operation in a foreign land to kill a dissident or a critic with 15 security agents. They did that in what they believe was in accordance with regime authority, regime policy, and regime culture, particularly as it pertains to dissidents. That makes the regime very culpable, and they should be condemned for that action. I do believe there is a path forward. We can certainly I'm not suggesting, nor a lot of other national security experts, you have to walk away from the arms deal. But we need to change the nature of the relationship to go forward. And I think we could wind up, actually, with a stronger relationship if the Saudis are willing to move towards a more of a values path than what they've been currently on.
So you think there's an opportunity for leverage here for the U.S. to actually get the better of the deal, but actually leverage the issue of human rights as well. I want to talk to you about the defense spending conversation we're now going to have, this idea of whether there's going to be a 5% cut across the board for the Pentagon for defense. In a Forbes.com piece by contributor Lauren Thompson, he talks about the House Democrats now being in control of the House because the two sides have to work together to get this thing done. He says the most likely outcome going forward is that military budgets will flatline for the remainder of the Trump presidency. He says the bias of the system is in favor of cutting weapons rather than readiness or people when money becomes scarce, and Democratic control of Congress's lower chamber will strengthen that bias. How do you think it impacts the military overall if they have to make these cuts?
Yeah, I absolutely do believe that's the path that we're currently on. And what that will do, clearly, is stop the recovery of the Defense Department after 15 years of decline. And what makes this a serious issue is that I've been a member of a commission for the last, you just suggested, would suffer a decline. We need to get back out on the technological edge where we have the advantage, not our adversaries.
Yeah, when you talk about a potential loss to Russia or China, that gets people's attention. General, you always get people's attention. We're glad you're here with us. Thanks for coming in.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You too. All right, Kentucky bans a controversial abortion method, but the ACLU says the law is unconstitutional and that Kentucky is just trying to shut down the state's only remaining abortion clinic. All right, you're going to hear from Kentucky's Governor Matt Bevin. The case now pending. He's live after the break. And will the Democrats turn deep red Mississippi blue? The last debate of the 2018 midterm elections is tonight. The runoff for Mississippi's U.S. Senate seat is next Tuesday, and the polls are tightening, thanks in part to this controversial comment. GOP Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith addresses that comment tonight. So does her opponent. And later, allegations of a massive voter fraud scheme in Los Angeles. There have been a lot of folks charged. Stick around for details.
In Kentucky after a certain point in pregnancy, and that is going to put health and lives of Kentucky women at risk.
All right, let's bring in Kentucky's Republican Governor Matt Bevin, who's obviously backing this measure. Governor, good to have you with us tonight.
Great to be with you as well. Thank you, Shannon.
Okay, so the trial wrapped up after 5 days. You're now waiting for the judge to rule. There's some other procedural things that will have to happen. In the meantime, so people know what we're talking about, and it's a difficult thing to discuss, but we're talking about the dismemberment of a fetus, and the law would require doctors to make sure that the fetus was actually dead before that process takes place. Here's what the ACLU is saying about that as well. They say this method is unfeasible and unreliable. It requires advanced training that physicians simply do not have, and in some instances will require and force physicians to experiment on their patients, and that is truly the burden that this law would place on women. Your response?
I think that's absolute nonsense. The idea that a doctor is incapable of learning how to do this, but is being given the responsibility to abort this child, speaks volumes in and of itself. The doctors on the stand during this past week acknowledged that with literally a day's worth of training or less, they would be quite capable of doing what this bill calls for. This is the ACLU simply not wanting there to be any obstacle whatsoever to this brutal and barbaric approach to dismembering a living human being. It has a beating heart. This child has a heartbeat, but is then dismembered in the process of killing it. It is barbaric and gruesome. And the people of Kentucky, through our legislature, has said that in our state, we think that's uncalled for. And that's simply what we are defending, is the right of the people in Kentucky to say this won't be allowed here.
Okay, so along with this law, there are two other Kentucky laws that have been subject to legal cases that are still pending as well. So how do you respond to the critics who say it's really not about particular methods or specific things that these laws cover, but you're really about just outlawing abortion, so it's not available in Kentucky?
This is untrue. That anyone who is saying that has not read this bill. This bill does not say anything about whether abortion itself is legal or not legal. It simply says the methodology by which in the second trimester an abortion can be performed cannot, from this point going forward, if this bill is upheld, allow the dismemberment of a living human being in the process of aborting that child. It simply says that that child must be killed first. It's preposterous when you think about this, Shannon. The fact that we're even having this conversation is remarkable to me, because if that very same child was discovered to have some type of a heart dysrhythmia or something that could be fixed in utero, that child would be anesthetized, that there would be an anesthetic applied, and then surgery surgery would be done on that same child. Why do we apply an anesthetic to a child in the womb when performing surgery if that child really feels no pain? Everyone knows that child feels pain. If that child was in the womb and was killed in an automobile accident, a person found culpable would be found culpable for the death of that child. So it's remarkable to me that in this instance, the ACLU wants to pretend it's not a child when legally it is under any number of other circumstances, and people know that it feels pain.
Well, and you know, as they debate here on Capitol Hill a number of times, the 20-week ban, which is the point at which the supporters of the bill say that an unborn fetus would feel pain. There are those who say that that's not scientifically accurate. They disagree with that assessment, and so they may not buy your argument.
There are many who think that it's actually long before that. When you look at the fact that this child has a heartbeat, the fact that it reacts literally to pokes and or prods. If you see twins, and my wife and I have given birth to twins, and we have seen the twins interact with one another at a very, very young age during the development process. There's no question children feel in the womb the exact point at which some would say it's well before 20 weeks. There are very few credible people that I've ever heard of that disagree with the fact that a child feels pain after 20 weeks. And if in fact that's the case, why do these very same people advocate to apply an anesthetic when performing surgery in the womb? Why would we waste the time and money associated with that if there was no pain involved?
Well, we know that there are very heated critics and opponents and supporters of this bill there in Kentucky. So we'll watch and wait as you do for the judge's ruling. And in the meantime, Governor, thank you for your time. Good to see you.
Thank you, Shannon.
All right, prosecutors say they've uncovered a widespread voter fraud scheme in Los Angeles, and it's all based on bribing homeless people to falsify voting documents. All that and more with tonight's Power Panel. There they are, standing by. This is a Fox News alert. The trial of a man accused of killing a New York City woman who was sexually attacked while jogging near her family's home has ended in a hung jury. A judge tonight granting a mistrial after the jury said it was split after just a day and a half of deliberations. Chanel Lewis accused of killing Karina Vetrano as she ran on a park trail in Queens. DNA evidence found at the crime scene reportedly matched his profile, and the jury saw his videotaped confessions. The defense claimed the crime scene had been corrupted and that the DNA evidence was suspect. Well, tonight, the LAPD has made multiple arrests in what authorities are calling a large-scale voter fraud scam. Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt joins us now with the story. Jonathan.
Good evening, Shannon. This is all part of a crackdown on voter fraud that the Los Angeles Police Department began long prior to the midterm elections. Investigators discovered that homeless people on LA's infamous Skid Row were being paid $1 or given food or cigarettes in exchange for false or forged signatures on ballot petitions. In the words of LAPD officer Dion Joseph, quote, they paid individuals to sign the name. Certainly concerned about any activity that causes voters to lose faith in the process. 9 people have now been charged in connection with the scheme, Shannon. They range in age from 28 to 62, and each could face 5 to 6 years in prison if convicted. Shannon?
Jonathan Hunt, thank you very much. Okay, so from voter fraud to voter suppression, Democrats in Georgia continue to claim voter registration laws and their enforcement cost them the gubernatorial race. Time now for tonight's Power Panel. Former Ohio Senate Democrat leader, Minority Leader Capri Cafaro, Fox News political analyst Gianno Caldwell, and host of Starnes Country on Fox Nation, Todd Starnes. Welcome to all of you.
Good evening.
Okay, I want to start, and we're going to do a little bit of lightning round so we can cover a lot of topics tonight. I want to start with this issue that Jonathan was just reporting about this fraud in Los Angeles. From the LA Times, they say using cash and cigarettes as lures, the defendants approached homeless people on Skid Row and asked them to forge signatures on state ballot measure petitions and voter registration forms. Todd, we'll start with you.
Yeah, look, aside from the fact that Los Angeles looks like a third world country with all those tents in the streets because of the Democrat regime over there, it's really no surprise here that you have voter fraud. Look, we've been hearing reports of this all over the country. And Shannon, at the end of the day, all of the people involved in this, and they haven't said who they were supporting, turn out to be Democrats.
Well, Gianno, we do often hear that there is no such thing as widespread voter fraud.
Yeah, and that's a complete lie. I'm actually in Chicago right now, which has a well-documented history of voter fraud and election corruption. But let's look at the facts here. The Heritage Foundation compiled a database of almost 1,200 voter fraud cases. Of those almost 1,200 voter fraud cases, 1,000 of them resulted in criminal convictions. So when we think about the elected officials, Democrats mostly, who have said, oh, voter fraud doesn't exist, that's a thing of the past, we see that the evidence proves otherwise. And I think this should be a telling note for every elected official around the country that this is something we should all be concerned about.
Capri, what do you think?
Look, I mean, again, we need to differentiate between quote unquote voter fraud and what is happening here. This is fraud, but it's not necessarily voter fraud. It is fraud in the collection of signatures. It is something that we have seen on the progressive side, for example, all the way back to 2004 with Acorn, where people were getting paid to collect signatures. This is very specific, though, as well to California. As someone who served at the state level in Ohio, when I was on the Constitutional Modernization Commission back in the Buckeye State, we actually looked at California because it really is an example of what not to do, because essentially the General Assembly in California abdicates their governing rights to the people entirely with these initiative petitions, with these, and this is what we're seeing here, that these folks are getting paid with, you know, cigarettes and booze and whatever else to go and collect signatures because they're trying to get something on the ballot. Here that these folks are getting paid with, you know, cigarettes and booze and whatever else to go and collect signatures because they're trying to get something on the ballot, rather than actually going through the process of having deliberation in the General Assembly. And that is what California does.
Every voter, every God-fearing voter in the state of Georgia, she knows very either one is unacceptable, and she ought to be ashamed of herself.
Gianno?
Well, with all due respect to her, Shannon, it sounds like sore loseritis, and I got to be honest with you, she's very much aware that the Supreme Court has upheld the fact that this state can purge voters from the rolls. They give them a 6-year period for voters to either vote, or when the state election board sends out a confirmation that they still live at that address, they can sign it and send it back. These are individuals that haven't done it. So this isn't something that's an attack on our democracy, as Stacey Abrams has suggested.
Well, and Capri, I mean, this case at the Supreme Court came from Ohio, where they would purge after, if you didn't vote in a certain number of elections, they would send out a card, say, do you still live here? Are you still alive? Is this your address? And if that wasn't returned, then you were wiped off the rolls. This took it was years of process. It wasn't overnight. But I want to read something from the Wall Street Journal's, their editorial board, in a piece they headlined, Democracy Succeeds in Georgia. They say this: if Mr. Kemp was trying to suppress voters, he did a lousy job. Georgia's voter rolls have swelled by more than 20% since 2010 amid an expansion in online registration. Voter turnout this year was up by 16.4 percentage points over 2014 levels, which is even greater than the 12.6 point increase nationwide. Early voting also doubled since 2014. And they conclude with this: by all evidence, Ms. Abrams benefited tremendously from this surge in turnout.
She did.
Sure. Look, I mean, I think that some of this is a bit of a political narrative for Stacey Abrams to try to couch herself maybe for a future election and, you know, wrap herself in something that may benefit from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, for example. So, I mean, really, at the end of the day, I mean, this is not something that I think is voter suppression, so to speak, but I do think that it was somewhat strategic because what they were looking for, I think, was an opportunity to trigger an automatic recount. There were 20,000 uncounted provisional ballots. That has nothing to do with voter suppression, but there were provisional ballots that were outstanding. That's basically as many as they would have needed to trigger an automatic recount. And I think they were trying to hold on, and maybe they overplayed their hand.
Okay, I literally need 10 seconds each from you guys about this Mississippi runoff next week. It's a very important seat for what's going to happen in the U.S. Senate moving ahead the next few years. The current Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith obviously triggering a lot of controversy by making a statement that one of her supporters, she was such a fan of his, if he invited her to a public hanging, she'd be in the front row. Something that came up tonight in their debate. She's running against Democratic challenger Mike Espy. Very quickly, we'll go in the opposite direction. Capri, your reaction to this race and where they go from here?
Terrible. Who knows what will happen in Mississippi? But look, the United States Senate is hanging in the balance, and the wider the margin, the more difficult it will be for President Trump.
Gianna?
I think the seat's going to stay in Republican hands, but I am disappointed with the comment, especially considering the history of Mississippi.
Todd, you close us out.
Shannon, I've got family in Mississippi. Sweet Lord Almighty. Geez, Lou. She was a Democrat back in 2010. What can I say?
He's going to hang it there. Okay. All right. Capri, Gianno, and Todd, have a great Thanksgiving. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. You too.
All right. A Florida school district embroiled in a transgender policy debate. A middle school teacher allegedly told that he has to supervise a biologically female student who now identifies as male in the boys' locker room. Now, he says when he objected, he was told it could cost him his job, maybe even his teaching license. He and his lawyer are here next with their side of the story.
Student was going to have full access to the locker room, that it was my job to supervise, and that it was her right to be able to use any part of the locker room, whether it be the locker room, the open showers, or the bathroom.
Okay, so I want to mention something today that the superintendent, Kurt Browning, mentioned. He's quoted as saying this today in a TampaBay.com article about this hearing with the school board. He says, I want the board and the public to be clear. The teacher coach has not been disciplined at all in any way, shape, or form, Browning said, noting that Chasco middle administrators have monitored the locker room for Apitasano, whom he called an excellent teacher. Students, he says, quote, do not undress in the locker room, Browning continued. There are showers, but no one takes showers. So, Matt, where is the problem here? They say there's no showering, there's no changing of clothes, so Robert wouldn't have to watch that. But was he told something different? Was he told he'd be in trouble if he didn't do that?
Well, the superintendent is not being truthful, because we have public records requests that show a string of emails, and Kathy Scalise, who's the director of the personnel services, she actually sent an email saying that she got directives and she was pushing to have Robert removed from school, and specifically said to instruct the principal on the day following to remove him from school and to keep him out of school as a disciplinary matter until he had a chance to talk with him. He was told specifically to supervise this girl in the boys' locker room, and he has a specific situation. In fact, even in this email chain, it specifically says that this girl undressed at least several times in front of the boys, and that the PE teacher, Robert, was there and did not want to supervise that. So they knew, and they threatened discipline. We never said he was disciplined. The reason why they stopped short of actually dismissing him is because we got involved. But the email chain instructs people to begin the process to let him go.
Okay, so I know there was a female teacher as well who was brought into this situation, said that she didn't want to be involved. Kathy Scalise, the Pasco County District Employee Relations Director that you mentioned, is quoted as saying this: have we threatened them with their jobs? Absolutely not. So, Robert, what is your take on this? Because, listen, these school departments are saying, we don't know exactly what to do. We're trying to do our best. We have to think about the rights of these trans students. But others have said, what about the parents? What about the other students, the boys in this locker room? What about their privacy rights? What position are you in now with regard to this case?
Well, I was told that the parents and the students had no rights, just the female student. She was the only one to have rights in there. I had mentioned something that they could get sued, and they said, we are the largest employer in Pasco County. If we get sued, it's no big deal.
Okay. Okay, Matt, I want to give you a chance to respond to something that is in Pasco County's Best Practices Guide for working with LGBTQ individuals. This one has to do with questions about whether a student comes to a teacher or someone to say, I'm uncomfortable, I don't feel safe because a transgender student is in my bathroom or locker room area. They're told this, quote, a student's discomfort does not trump a transgender student's right to use the school facility that is consistent with their gender identity. If it's a comfort issue, you may offer an alternative facility to the student experiencing experiencing discomfort. So here they're saying if a student doesn't want the trans individual in their locker room area, they're the ones who need to leave. Is that a solution that works?
That's not a solution that works. And in fact, in this particular case, you'd have to have all the boys go to some other place, because this girl undressed in front of these boys and the boys came running out. They were disturbed that a girl was in their locker room undressing. So apparently only that girl can use the boys' facility. And now all of these boys that ran out have to go someplace else. That's not workable. That same guideline that they have also says that you should not, in fact, you're not authorized to let the parents know what's happening with their son or daughter in these situations. Now, the same Kathy Scalise that said no one's ever been disciplined, I've got an email from her on September 28th saying it would send a very strong message to send him home. And on the same day, a few minutes later, she said, instruct the principal to tell him not to return to work until we have a chance to talk with him. She wanted to send a strong message. She wanted to ultimately relieve him from his duty. And she is the one now who says, well, we never disciplined.
All right.
She's not telling the truth.
All right. Matt and Robert, thank you both. We want to let folks know we reached out to a number of school officials through email, through phone calls. We want to include their part of the story beyond the quotes that we've had here. If we hear back from them, they are more than welcome to take part in the story. But Matt and Robert, please keep us updated on the case.
Thank you. We will do so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. All right, the Los Angeles Fire Department releases dramatic new rescue footage from the Woolsey fire as the campfire continues to claim more lives. An update from California next. The death toll in the Northern California wildfires climbed to 79 as the number of unaccounted for hovers around 700. While in the southern part of the state, we have dramatic new rescue footage. Correspondent Claudia Cowan is there in Chico tonight.
This isn't home, and we're looking for a home.
For Lisa Martin and thousands of residents of Paradise, California, there is no home to go to this Thanksgiving. Instead, some will be spending it here at this church evacuation center in Chico.
You're reflecting on everything you're grateful for. It's not frivolous. It's actually meaningful. I'm very grateful to still be here.
Hundreds are still living outside with heavy rain, flash flood watches, and cold temperatures in the forecast for tomorrow. The race is on to get evacuees into more permanent shelters, as well as get through as much of the search and recovery process as possible.
All right, this is not going to be pretty.
The LA Fire Department released new video of tense moments as one of its helicopter crews rescued people from a mountain peak last week. With low fuel and the Woolsey fire raging, the pilots managed to land and get 3 people and their dogs to safety.
That's enough excitement for me today.
The first winter storm of the season is expected to roll in tonight and last through the week. Officials say they are concerned that a heavy downpour could trigger mudslides. In Chico, California, Claudia Cowan, Fox News.
We will continue tracking those fires overnight and bringing the very latest in the morning. In the meantime, most watched, most trusted, most grateful you spent your evening with us. Good night for now from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream. Stick around. You'll get another helping of Tucker Carlson next. And who doesn't want that?